Alabama splattered Ohio State all over Miami Gardens, Florida last night. The final score was 52-24. If you watched this game and you are not of the age of at least 18, I really hope for your sake you had a parent sitting next to you, because that was one of those TVMA specials. You don't get them very often in a championship setting, but we got it. It is the worst out-of-conference loss for Ohio State University since they lost to something called Worcester in 1890. I think maybe I had a great uncle named Worcester. Never heard of Worcester. I mean, aside from that very famous 1890 team, and who could forget how good they were then. So what started out, I mean, like, I was watching this game, obviously. What started out as a football field, it kind of ended in sort of a crime scene fashion. But I got a lot of admiration for Ohio State. And so on the back end of this segment, we're going to be talking about Ohio State. But if you want to know about how to adapt, and you want to know why pretty much everyone at this point, if you don't have an axe to grind, everyone now views Nick Saban as the greatest of all time, and you should have if you had good sense about yourself before last night. It was 8 years ago that they played a national championship game in New Orleans against LSU. It was that rematch, you know, the one that ended up giving us a playoff, you know, because we couldn't have that happen again. We can't be having Alabama getting a shot in a national title, so let's have a playoff to keep them out of the title game. Yeah, so I'm not talking about that yet. But what I do want to tell you is January 9th, 2012, Alabama plays LSU. Alabama dominates LSU. They put up 384 total yards. They had 21 first downs, and they had 21 points. They beat LSU 21-0, okay? Last night, in the first half against Ohio State, they had 389 total yards. They had 25 first downs, and they had 35 total points. So they outgained in all three of those key metrics their own dominating effort about 8 or 9 years ago in the first half of a game against Ohio State. Really incredible to watch, so let's dive into it. What did we say needed to happen? For those of you who watched our game preview, I thought that staying on schedule, and just meaning staying ahead of the sticks, was probably as imperative for Ohio State in this game as any game that they've played all year. The reason's pretty obvious. There has not been a team, even Indiana, all due respect to Tom Allen and company, there has not been a team that Ohio State have faced this year that put the fear of God into them. And by that, I mean, you knew when you looked across the field, we're going to have to keep up with that team. I mean, they're playing Northwestern in the Big Ten title game, knowing they can all but afford to take a nap the first half. Northwestern's not going anywhere. They're going to sit there with their 7, 10, or 13 points, and whenever we're ready, we're just going to run by them. And that's exactly what they did. Well, they couldn't do it here. So they had to stay on schedule because they could not be putting Justin Fields in a whole bunch of obvious passing downs. And I told you in our preview video, I thought probably the most important stat line in this game was drawing a line on third downs offensively for Ohio State. Third down and 4 or shorter, third down and 5 or greater. So in the first half last night, sure enough, they had 5 situations of 3rd and 5 or more. And they were 1 of 5 on those attempts. They also had one that was not converted, but then you had a targeting call on Battle. That's another topic for another day. But Alabama did not allow any kind of balance. Alabama did not allow Ohio State to be balanced. And as a result, aside from one long run that was quarterback run in the first half, you never really had Ohio State, after Sermon goes out on the first drive, you never had them able to own things on the ground like maybe they would have had an opportunity to had they been at full strength there. I'm not making excuses for them, nor did they, to their credit, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But there was never any balance allowed. Even when they forced the turnover, did Ohio State, and evened it up at 14, man, a lot of the critical metrics in that game had already started to tilt heavily in favor of Alabama. History, I think, is going to remember a blowout in this game, because of obviously the final score being 52-24. And, you know, Director Colin told me he even got a little shut-eye during the second half. And as it turns out, you could afford to do that because it turned into a sleeper. But I want to tell you what was probably the most impressive thing I think I saw in a big game all year this year. It was in the second half. It was the early portion of the second half. You look at 52-24, and 5 years from now, when you remember this game, you'll say, it was never close, dude. Ohio State never had a shot. Well, that's false, because there was a moment in this game, early portion of the second half, Devontae Smith, I think it was the opening drive of the second half, he's out. He gets knocked out. He's done. You will not see him again wear a crimson uniform. And Waddle's far less than 100%. And Alabama has allowed Ohio State to pull to within 14 points. It's a 2-possession game, and Ohio State went boom, boom, boom. Bama opened the second half, they put up a field goal, and Ohio State goes right down the field. Guys, it's a 14-point game. Smith's not on the field for the rest of the night. Waddle is 60% at best. You do not have any dynamic, game-changing options at receiver. In other words, you think the identity for Alabama is no longer on the field. I mean, the Heisman Trophy winner's not out there. They didn't allow another point the rest of the night. Not only that, they scored 14 more of their own. Lose Devontae Smith. Have Ohio State have seemingly all the momentum in the world. There's some juice on their sideline, and they outscore them by 2 touchdowns the rest of the way. That is impressive. Now I want you to think about this. So zoom it out a little bit. To understand the brilliance of Steve Sarkeesian, if you don't already, to understand how brilliant their offense was this year and why I think it's the best offense we've ever seen, it's because it didn't lean on any one guy. It didn't hinge on any one guy. They lose Waddle. You got the Heisman Trophy winner over here. And to be honest with you, if Waddle stayed healthy all year, they probably would have fought over the Heisman Trophy. And as it turns out, they end up kicking it into another gear once they lose Waddle. Well, last night, I mean, if you just think about losing Devontae Smith off the field, that's enough. But think about this. If you do a year-over-year, moment-in-time comparison, last night, early portion of the third quarter, Smith's out. I want you to think about this. Don't just think about what they had coming into the game versus what they had at that moment. Think about 1 year earlier. What would they have had on the field 1 year earlier? And then what did they have on the field at that very moment last night with 10 minutes to go in the third quarter? You take Jerry Jeudy off the field, Henry Ruggs off the field, a 100% Jalen Waddle off the field, Devontae Smith off the field, Tua Tagovailoa, Jedrick Wills. You're taking all those first-rounders off the field, and they're still in a situation where they're just going up and down the field, seemingly at will, in a national championship game. That is Steve Sarkeesian. Like, that's some good players. Najee Harris had a phenomenal effort last night. I'm going to throw a stat at you right now. For you longtime Alabama fans, it's probably going to blow your mind. But man, Steve Sarkeesian is in a league of his own, amongst the most elite minds in the game. He's in a league of his own right now. Cannot wait to see what he does at Texas. But when you combine that culture and you combine Steve Sarkeesian running things, man, Nick Saban, I heard my dad say the other day, and I think he's right. Nick Saban has been famous in the past for just chewing out coordinators on the sideline. I mean, if he wasn't doing it to Lane Kiffin, he wasn't breathing. I don't think he ever had a single instance this whole year where he even looked at Steve Sarkeesian sideways. Did you ever see it? I didn't see it, man. It's like he was so docile. It's if he wanted to nitpick something, what was he going to find? I don't know. So last night, Christian Barmore made millions of dollars. I assume he's going to be gone. He was a force the entire evening. Reminded you a lot of Quinnen Williams in years gone by for Alabama. Devontae Smith had more in a half than some wide receivers have in a month of playing this sport. Just incredible. 215 yards at the half, had 12 catches. He needed some ridiculous number like 19 catches in the game or 20 catches to surpass Amari Cooper for all-time receptions in Alabama history. And I'm not so sure he wasn't going to get it. If they let him play a full game, they probably, all they had to do is keep throwing to him because no one's shutting him down. Poor Sean Wade, my goodness. Put the body tape on the field for that kid. But he was going to have 20 catches last night. I fully believe that. So that injury probably cost you seeing that guy make even more history. But Mac Jones was great. But I'll tell you who stepped up, and it was John Mechie. John Mechie had a couple of drops early on that probably had a lot of you Bama fans yelling at your TV screen. There were some big third downs. There were some big move-the-chain moments in the second half, again, where the game, it's not out of reach. And you're scared because you've lost Devontae Smith, Waddle's on 1.5 legs here. Man, what are we going to do? Could we bog down here? Never happened. John Mechie was really big in being able to move the chain several times, but so was Najee Harris. Najee Harris didn't have a 150-yard rushing performance last night, but what he did is he had several of those instances where, handoff. Oh, Najee Harris has stopped at the line of scrimmage. What's that? He gained 7 yards? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, Najee Harris stopped in the backfield. He gained 5. He gained 6 yards. Oh, that's interesting. Just fall forward every single time. Fall forward, fall forward. Here's the stat that's going to blow your mind, though. I had a kind of a player personnel type today tell me Najee Harris is one of the very few guys that you'll see that they would grade, if you were talking recruiting, they would grade like a 5-star caliber running back and receiver. How about this stat? If you're an Alabama fan, think about what I'm about to tell you. Najee Harris wraps his career at Alabama with as many receiving touchdowns as David Palmer had. He's not even a receiver. And so that's how good Najee Harris was. 11 total receiving touchdowns in the career for Najee Harris at Alabama. Had 3 total touchdowns last night. I got to give Ohio State a lot of credit. I watched Ryan Day's postgame press conference last night. That's a guy who was missing Tommy Togiai on defensive line. I mean, they were missing several guys. Trey Sermon goes out early, probably an integral part of their game plan. Justin Fields is toughing it out. In other words, you had every reason to kind of try and make some excuses for yourself, and he made none because that's not the kind of guy he is. But also, I would encourage you to remember, I thought Kirk Herbstreit made a phenomenal point last night. Did you ever, in a national championship game, did you ever, with 2 of the most loaded rosters in the sport, even so much as see players talking to each other? There was none of it. Back in the day, you know, my favorite rivalry in the SEC for a long time has been Bama-LSU because there's such an immense amount of mutual respect between the programs, and there's never any jawing back and forth. Very rarely do you see a personal foul flag thrown. That's kind of the way it was last night. And that's not a surprise because if you watch the way Ohio State carried themselves after they spanked Clemson, all that talk out of Clemson leading up to it, Ohio State goes in there and just methodically drains them dry right there on the field, and then they just kind of dust themselves off. We're on to the national championship game. We're not even going to let their name come out of our mouth in any kind of coarse way until we get in the closed doors and confines of our own locker room. That's the kind of program they run. That's why I have no doubt that Ohio State's going to be here for a long time to come. And I can not guarantee you, but I would put my money on the fact that over the next few years, Ryan Day's going to be hoisting one of those national championship trophies. It may even come at the expense of Alabama one of these days. But you look at the way that those 2 teams are recruiting, not going anywhere. But as of last night, the craziest recruiting reality in the history of college football remains intact, and that is the ability for Nick Saban or one of his assistants to walk in a living room and say, hey, Nick Saban, got here in 2007, about to go into the 2021 season. I've been here like 14 years or whatever it is. Every kid I've ever recruited, LSU and Alabama, that stayed the duration has won at least one national championship. Okay, now you make the decision. You go play wherever you want to.